The first punishment we shall be covering is the gag. This, simply put, is an implement designed to silence the victim. It can be as simple as a length of rope to a complex metal structure. Often, there is an element of public humiliation to the gag, or an element of oppression, and a show of authority. Perhaps the most disturbing example is the skull's bridle. This was a metal headpiece that would act as a muzzle. Affixed to the headpiece would be a bridle bit, a couple of inches long and about an inch wide. This would be placed into the mouth of the victim, pressing down on their tongue as to stop speech. Some of these bridle bits would even be serrated to add to the discomfort. The bridle would be locked in place with a padlock at the back of the head. The scald refers to the crime of being a scald. This was defined as someone who was troublesome or angry. It could be someone who broke the peace by being rude, arguing, and being too loud. In many cases, it was a woman who argued with a male authority figure. Women were most likely to be punished with a scald's bridle. This practice originated in 16th century Scotland as a punishment for women who were deemed too troublesome or who nagged too much. There was an element of humiliation in this form of punishment, with accounts of women being left in public spaces for all to see the consequences of their disobedience. Some of the bridles would even have a bell attached or painted a bright colour, and this was to bring attention to the victim. In Germany, these gags became even more elaborate. These shame masks would be styled into the shape of animals, or would have a full face mask with exaggerated features. Whilst the use of the skull's bridle was commonplace in Britain and Germany, it did make its way across to the United States. One former enslaved person, named Olada Equiano, wrote in his autobiography seeing an enslaved woman with a bridle. He recalled seeing the woman when he first arrived in Virginia, working as a cook whilst wearing the bridle. The next punishment we shall look at is the punishment of using molten gold as an ironic form of execution. Gold has long been the symbol of wealth, but for those who seek it at all cost, or for the richest of people who lose favour, molten gold has been used as a brutal method of execution. Often, the execution involves molten gold being poured down the victim's throat. The molten gold would then congeal in the throat, leading to suffocation. The heat of the metal coming into contact with the mouth and esophagus would not only inflict immense pain, but would also cause the organs to rupture and blister. The damage caused by the molten gold would likely result in the person's death by shock or by pulmonary dysfunction. Marcus Licinius Crassus, a close friend of Julius Caesar, is one of the most infamous victims of this punishment. Crassus was regarded as the richest man in Rome, using his wealth to assist Caesar in turning the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. It is reported that following the defeat of his army by the Parthians in 53 BC, the richest man in Rome met a disturbing end. Some accounts detail how following his capture, molten gold was poured down his throat. However, other accounts detail that he was already dead when the gold was poured down his throat into his severed head, which was then used as a grisly prop in a Greek play. Either way, Crassus's death highlights the ironic use of molten gold as a punishment, and he would not be the last to suffer this fate. During the Spanish invasion of South America in the 16th century, conquistadors battled against the native Indians to loot as much gold as they could. The Mapuche people of modern-day Chile were all aware of the Spanish goals, as well as their military tactics. On Christmas Day 1553, Spanish conquistadors and their native auxiliaries, led by Pedro de Valdivia, were visiting the fort of Tucapel. They found the fort destroyed before being ambushed by warriors of the Mapuche. Having learned the Spanish tactics, the Mapuche were victorious in the Battle of Tucapel. The Spanish soldiers to the last man, and most of the native auxiliaries were killed in the battle. But Valdivia attempted to flee on horse, only to get bogged down and stuck in a swamp. He was captured, and there are different accounts of his fate. Some detail how his arms were cut off, then roasted and eaten by his captors, as he was forced to watch in horror as his arms were consumed. Others tell how he was tortured before his heart was ripped from his chest, and others tell of how the gold he sought was given willingly by the Mapuche. Only, it was melted and then poured down his throat. Valdivia would not be the last Spaniard killed in this manner. In 1599, a Spanish governor in colonial Ecuador also suffered this fate. Native Indians of the Jivaro tribe were oppressed and were exploited in the Spanish gold trade. In response, they attacked the settlement of Logrono. They captured and executed the gold-hungry governor by feeding him the molten gold he so craved. According to the accounts of his execution, the gold was poured until the governor's bowels burst. This punishment, ironically employed against those who seek wealth at any cost, is beyond disturbing. From the immense heat, the clogging of the throat, and the ruptured organs, one can only be thankful that such a punishment leads to a quick death. The final punishment of the video is one synonymous with the terror of the French Revolution. The guillotine was a form of execution that allowed for efficient executions of those purged during the French Revolution. The guillotine is a relatively simple idea. The condemned's head is locked into place, and below their head sits a basket filled with sawdust to absorb the blood that will soon flow. Above their neck stands a large rectangular structure akin to a window frame, though rather than a plane of glass, there sits an angled metal blade. When the blade is released from the top of the frame, it will drop directly onto the person's neck, beheading them. The head will then drop into the basket, whilst the body will be rolled into a cheap coffin. Beheading was long seen as the most suitable execution method for nobles and royalty. If done properly by a trained executioner with a sharp blade, it offered both a quick and clean death. But there are examples of botched beheadings, such as the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her executioner's first swing missed her neck, instead hitting the back of her head. Whilst the second swing did hit the neck, it was still somewhat attached to the body with sinew that had to be cut away with an axe. And so the guillotine was designed to avoid such accidents. The guillotine was invented by the French physician and politician Dr. Joseph Guillotine. He had hoped the device would be less painful than other forms of execution, such as being burned alive or being hanged, drawn and quartered. Not only was it painless, but also an equitable form of execution. No longer would beheading be reserved for the nobility, one form of execution for all. Guillotine's ultimate goal was the abolition of the death penalty, but realizing there was no appetite for such a position, he hoped his invention would at least be the first step towards this hope. It was designed based on other similar devices used in Britain, such as the Scottish Maiden. These were devices that used blunt, heavy force to decapitate, but the guillotine would use a blade. The device was introduced as a form of execution in time for the Reign of Terror in 1793. This was a period during the time of the French Revolution where thousands were arrested and executed. This was to consolidate control and power of the revolutionaries, eliminating those who opposed them. Carts full of the condemned would be taken to the guillotines, dozens executed in quick succession. Such executions were public affairs, witnessed by thousands, and at the height of terror, even the king and queen were not above being executed by the guillotine. King Louis XVI and Queen Mary Antoinette were executed by guillotine, being arguably the most notable to meet such a fate. Mary Antoinette's last words were reportedly an apology for her executioner after she stood on his foot before he killed her. But not every use of the guillotine was so public, nor would it remain an exclusively French method of execution. In Nazi Germany, the guillotine was used to execute thousands of political prisoners. One notable victim was Sophie Scholl, a young peace activist who distributed leaflets opposing the Nazis. For this, she was executed by guillotine. The guillotine remained as the form of execution in France, though by the 1940s, such executions were done in private. It was only in 1981 that France abolished the death penalty and formally put an end to using the guillotine. The last person to be executed in this way was Hamida Jandoubi, who was convicted of murder, SA, and forced prostitution. Whilst there have been a myriad of tortures and executions that have been employed throughout human history, what unites them all is the unique human propensity for imaginative cruelty. The number of creative methods of inflicting pain and suffering is something that unfortunately unites all nations and people.